Well, good morning, Stonewater family, and happy Mom's Day. Let's give it up for all the moms. We love you, ladies. Happy Mother's Day, Lisa.
Thank you.
And I'm like, happy Mother's Day, Lisa. Would you like to preach with me? Like, it's like the worst Mother's Day gift ever. But, thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're going to tag team the message. And we've been in this sermon series for the past 2 weeks, and it's called Wyld One. So when you look at the Bible and you look at the scriptures and what Jesus calls us to do and what we're to be as followers of him, you look at that and it looks so contrary to the world's way of doing stuff. And a lot of people on the outside may look at us and say, wow, what a wild bunch. Like, what a wild thinking that God has called you to live this life that's so much different than the world. So over the last 2 weeks, Pastor Jeremy's been teaching on Wyld Ones. We've looked at the word wild. We can't spell very good around Stonewater, so it's wild is spelled W-Y-L-D. So we use WILD as an acronym. The first week, Pastor Jeremy talked about the W was for willing. Like, are we willing to forsake all things and follow the Lord? I'm reminded of a gentleman in the Bible that just says, "Here am I, Lord, send me." So as a wild one, a true disciple of Jesus, God's called us to be willing to do whatever God has called us to. And then the second week, last week, Pastor Jeremy talked about the why, which was yielding. And what was that all about, Lisa? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yes, you are. You have to be willing to yield to the Holy Spirit, that you're always listening to him, to his prompting in your life, to the whisper that he gives you, what he tells you in your spirit to go and to do. But you always have your ears tuned to him.
That's right. And so, like, you've done this really well through the years. So just like yielding to the Spirit of God. And then today, we're going to take a look at the L, and the L is for loving. So as a follower of Jesus Christ, to live out this wild faith that he's called us to, God's looking for us to be willing, yielding to the Spirit, and also loving.
So we're going to start out this morning with a little get-to-know-you game.
I love games. I'm going to win.
Do you guys love games? Yeah? Okay, so first question. During a conflict, so just talk to the person you're sitting with, the people you're with. During a conflict, are you a big fighter or a big flighter? Do you run to the conflict, or do you run away from the conflict?
I run to it, baby. What about
I know you do. So you're going to find that Joy and I are totally opposites.
Absolutely.
On everything. Yeah, so he's full of the words. He always comes right in. He has his arguments lined up. He can talk right on the spot. And I'm like, I have to step away, have to gather my thoughts. I have to figure out
write them on a piece
what
of
I'm
paper.
thinking. I don't write them on a paper. But I have to gather my thoughts, and then I can go.
Exactly.
And
So I enjoy conflict, debate, and I kind of run to that. I kind of enjoy that. I always kind of look at the opposite.
Right, you play the devil's advocate.
Yeah,
You're always on the
I
other
love
side.
that. That's so much fun.
I don't understand.
All right, so yeah, we may be a little bit different. All right, what's the next question?
In social settings, are you the big talker or the big not talker, the big listener?
The big talker, of course. There's so much to say, so little time to say it in.
Yeah, we have a daughter that never stops talking.
Yeah, she got that from you.
No.
All right, so big talker, big listener. Yeah, so you're a listener?
I'm a non-talker.
A non-talker, yeah. That's
I
true.
listen. Okay, when it comes to money, are you a big spender or a big saver?
Big spender, big saver. Yeah. It's hard to evaluate yourself. You probably need to ask somebody. So I think I save, but also when it's time to spend, boom, you got to spend.
That's true.
Yeah. So what about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty stingy. I don't buy a lot.
That's right. What
But then
about all those Amazon packages that come to our house? What's all that about? Who did that?
I don't know.
I don't know either. All right, so it's really important to kind of get to know you and how you're wired, how God made you. But when it comes to this question of money, we got to ask ourselves, do we spend or do we save? But when it comes to being a wild one for Jesus, how are you doing spending your love? Are you like a big lover? Like you're spending love right and left? Like I'm loving you, like I'm a big spender when it comes to love? Or are we pretty stingy with our love? Like we're not going to share, it's all mine, like what are you going to, if I were to give you some money, what would you do with it, And so but God has called us as wild ones to be very generous with our time, our energy, our resources. But when it comes to love, like, are you a big spender when it comes to love? Kind of a different concept of kind of looking at this equation. So today, we're going to understand that when we love, like there's a high price to pay when we love, especially loving the way that God called us. Now, there's no better day of the calendar year to talk about love than Mom's Day. Like on Mother's Day, like you ladies do a great job of just shelling out love just to the kids, to the family, to others. Like it's a great to honor all mothers and all women, because I feel like that's how God really wired you ladies to just express love in so many different ways, real practical ways to all of us. But when we love, we need to recognize there really is like a high price. There's a cost when we love others. And like we've experienced this through the years. Like when you pour out to others, like it really does cost you. It costs you sometimes physically, like a real monetary cost. But there's like an emotional investment that you have, like in our kids, like in our friends and our relatives. Like you're expending a lot of energy and emotion and mental capabilities too. And so, but there's a high price to pay when we're talking about loving other people. So if you're taking notes today, here's the big idea. Here's where we're going. So wild ones, and recognize wild ones are really biblical disciples. People who are following after Jesus with everything that they have. So we're the wild ones for the Lord. Wild ones pay a high price to love.
So today we're going to look at two questions as we explore this high price to love. We're going to ask Jesus, how do we love you? How do you want us to love you, Jesus? And the second question is, Jesus, how do you want us to love others? So let's start with the first one. How are wild ones called to love Jesus? Or how are disciples of Christ called to love Jesus? If we look in Luke chapter 4, verse 25, let's read there. A large crowd was following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, "If you want to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Your father and your mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple. But don't begin until you count the cost."
Who came up with this passage for Mother's Day?
Yeah,
hey,
it's a rough
moms,
one.
hate your children. Who came up with this? Jeez.
It was your idea.
All right. Thank you, Lord. You're not supposed to tell. We'll blame it on Jeremy, All right, so we were discussing this with our kids yesterday, and we're like, okay, do you love Jesus? And they're like, yeah, of course we love Jesus. I was like, do you love Mom? And they're like, Lila looked at us, she's like, I'm disgusted that you even asked that question. Of course I love Mom. And then I'm like, who do you love more, Jesus or Mom? And Corbin, he's 16.
He wouldn't answer.
He's like, no, it's a trick question, not answering, And Lila's like, she didn't know what to do. She's 10, and she loves Jesus with everything. She loves her mom with everything. And she's like, I was like, all right, well, here's what the passage says. So we read it, and Lila's like, so I'm supposed to hate my mom? And she's like almost crying. And I'm like, geez, this is not going to go well tomorrow, And so like we look at this passage, and like this is a passage that you would say, wow, this is a really hard teaching. So let's make sure we interpret it correctly. So let's go back and look. So Jesus, there's a big crowd that's following him, and he turns to them and says, the cost of discipleship. The cost of being a wild one, Jesus says, if you want to be my disciple, you must by comparison. So this is the New Living Translation. So they're saying, hey, by comparison. If you look at other translations, it just skips that and says, you got to hate everybody else, okay? So whichever one you're reading this morning, just understand, like in the real context of this, the New Living Translation's right. Like it really is saying, if you were to put all your relationships on one side of the paper, put Jesus on the other, like you have a real choice to make. Like which one are you going to choose first? Because whichever one you choose first, it's going to affect all the other relationships. So this is how I described it to Lila yesterday. I was like, Lila, if you choose Jesus first, like if he's the priority, if you love him the most, then you go to Jesus and you go to his word, and Jesus tells you how best to love your mom, how best to honor your mother and father, how best one day she's going to be married, how best to love your husband and your kids and your brother and sister, especially your brother and sister, you know, they fight and everything. And so but the one part that may get left out of this passage, look at it in verse 26 again. It gives the long list of father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters. And then it says, yes, even your own life. So like, don't skip that piece of the relationship. So when you are choosing Jesus, you are saying, Jesus, you direct me, you teach me, you guide me in all my other relationships, even if it costs us, even if there's a high price to pay in my other relationships. So Lisa, for you and I, before we got married, this summer, before we got married, like you and I decided we were all in with Jesus. Like I was a youth pastor, and it was at a summer camp where I really felt like God was calling me to ministry. And so I remember I called Lisa. Remember the payphones? I called you on a payphone from camp, from Oklahoma. And I said, Lisa, God's called me to ministry. And I said, yes, and I'm going to serve him for the rest of my life. I'm choosing him. And then Lisa said, you know what? I'm doing the exact same thing. Let's do this together. And then we got married at the end of the summer. So for us, long before we had kids, like we made that decision. Jesus is first. And then as a result, like probably like this list of all the people, the ones who suffered the most, that have paid the highest price for you and I choosing Jesus first, has been our kids. Like we've dragged them all over the place. Like how many places have we lived, do you think?
I think it's like 12 or 14 just in the first 12 or 14 years.
I think
of our
so,
marriage.
yeah. People kept running us off and stoning us. No, that's not right. All right, so but it was our kids. Like I remember when we started Stonewater Church over like 15 years ago, like we told our two boys at the time, God's called us to move, to start a church. We're moving. And they were just like, we're not going to have friends. Yeah. Like nobody, we're leaving everybody. And then after that, we moved to California, and we were out there for a couple of years. We moved back. We told our kids, we had 4 at the time, and then we said, hey, we're about to adopt 2 more kids. And you know what kids don't want? More kids, right? They don't want more kids. They want mommy and daddy all to themselves. So we brought 2 more kids. Now we have 6 kids, and us 2, 8 people living in the same house. And I know that was difficult for all of our kids together. And then even like last summer when we moved to Tyler for 3 months, like that was a big move. So for us, like we've always said to our kids, hey, we're choosing Jesus first. And then you're second. And we've done that in our marriage. And it hasn't always been easy, but it's always worked. It's always been a big blessing. Yeah. So as we look at this and Jesus' words, like we need to understand, like there's a high price to pay if you're choosing to believe and follow Jesus first, and then Jesus directs all your other relationships. But I'm telling you, it's worth it. This is how God's called us. Like this is what we're wired to do. It's not easy, but listen to what he says at the final verse. At the very end of this passage, like if you thought relationships was hard, like look what he says that we're to do. If we're going to be wild ones, to follow after him, to pay the high price, listen to what he says as he concludes this passage.
Yeah, so he goes on in verse 33 and says, so you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. Now, this is hard. Like, Jesus doesn't just want our relationships, the people we love. He also wants all of our stuff. Like, that's hitting pretty close to home now. But if we want to be a disciple, if we want to be a wild one, we have to give up everything, not just our relationships, but also our things.
Yeah, it's hard.
It is hard.
I don't want to. It's mine. I paid for it. It's mine. I worked hard for this. Like, these are things I've said to the Lord. It's not good, but that's where it's at. Like, you have to really give up everything to follow the Lord. So when you and I moved back from California to Granbury, we moved into our dream home. Mm-hmm. And I just remember walking out in our field and just looking at our house and where we were. And I just was real honest with the Lord. I was like, Lord, if you call us to move and sell this, like, it's going to be really hard. Lord, I don't know if I would be willing to do that. Like, I remember that. And so God didn't strike me dead. But it was just an honest evaluation of where I am. So just right there where you are, just be honest with the Lord. Like, is he first place or not? And then your stuff. Would you be willing to give up your stuff to the Lord?
So we want you guys to watch a quick video of a family in our church, a Stonewater family, that did that. They did give up everything they had and all their relationships to follow Jesus.
Let's take a look.
Yep.
So I'm Tyler Jones. This is my wife, Crystal Jones, and we have two kids, Hudson and Harley. Basically, we had this great life. I had this great job making good money. My wife made good money, and we were just so stable. Had this real nice home that we lived in, our dream home. I just remember praying one day, and God literally told me it's time to go and time to get rid of the house. We lived in this awesome 4,000 square foot home, 4-bedroom, 4-bath, and loved it. And but we, like I said, we sold it just in an act of being obedient to God.
Of course, when he told me that it was time to go and to go all in for Christ, I was completely on board.
As we sold it, we bought a motorhome, and we've been traveling ever since that day, ministering the gospel in the streets. We've set up in parking lots, and we've set up doing tent revivals and just going out and reaching the lost. We've seen literally just me and my wife traveling in this last year, around 400 souls come to know the Lord, just from the obedience of stepping out in faith.
Another thing is our children are getting to see miracles. They're getting to see God perform, and they're getting to see us live out faith.
We just had this deep longing and yearning to go and see people just completely transformed by Jesus Christ. What we're doing and what we've seen God do is all out of obedience. And Mark chapter 16 tells us to go into all the world and preach the gospel. So when we hear the word go forth and preach the gospel, we don't have any indication in us anymore of let's stay here. It's always go. So we just have this adventurous and wild spirit inside of us saying go into the world, so we cannot stay idle anymore.
Wow. You guys are wild. You sold everything. You gave up everything. You left Mississippi and all your relationships there. I'm sure y'all's mamas were super happy, right? No, don't answer that. And so, like, y'all left everything to follow the Lord. And so, like, that's exactly what we read here in the scriptures, that you put Jesus first and you give up everything and you follow him. So I got two questions for y'all. Tyler, you're up first. Did it work?
Yes, it did work. When we pursued a purpose over popularity, that was the word that kept coming to my mind. When we pursued that and we started to realize, like, my purpose is to love people and not to identify myself with what I have and all these things, we found that identity and that love that we've been looking for. So, yes, it worked 100%.
Awesome. And 400 people's lives are changed forever.
Yes.
Because y'all chose to follow the Lord, and probably many more than that as well. So, Crystal, us guys, we come up with wild stuff to do all the time, and then normally our wives are like, "All right, simmer down there, boy," you know. And so, like, but for you to go all in, like, that was incredible. So my question for you is, was it worth it?
Yes, it was definitely worth it. I did have fear at first, but we went to God in prayer, and He increased our faith. And we were already all in for Christ, but I craved more of Christ. And I knew the opposite of fear is faith, and so I had to trust and obey the Lord, and that's what we did.
Wow. I'm so proud of you guys. These guys have been on the Stonewater staff since January of this year. But the previous year, like, they went for an entire year. Y'all didn't take a salary. Y'all didn't get paid. Like, they just went out on the road and they shared the gospel. They would do revivals, and people's lives were changed. Like, I'm really proud of you guys. So when I met y'all back in November, heard y'all's story, y'all just really encouraged me. And then God opened up an opportunity for you guys to come on board, and Tyler leads all of our outreach ministries. You've been doing all the challenges, the Wild Ones challenges each week. So we have a new one coming up this week, Tyler. Can you give us a hint what it's going to be about?
All right. I can't tell you a lot, can't give you like the day and the time, but what I will tell you is this: you're going to have to pay the cost to love. There's going to be a sacrifice that has to be made. So that's all I'm going to tell you.
So, are we going to have to sell our house and buy an RV?
No.
Okay, geez, all right, I was getting a little worried. So you guys would say that that God's not calling all of us to do that. That's not what we're saying today. But we've got to be willing to do that if God calls us. We got to be yielding to the Spirit if He's called us, and we've got to do it all out of love for other people. So God may not be calling everyone to do that. But you got to ask yourself this morning, like, could we be like them if God called us to that? Would we be willing and yielding and loving to go do these things as a wild one for Jesus? So, hey, let's give it up for the Joneses. Love you guys. Appreciate y'all. Definitely, we don't want to be keeping up with the Joneses on that one. All right? So you guys are wild ones. Hey, and we love y'all. Thank you so much. What a great example to us. And so let's kind of recap where we are in the sermon. We began by looking at the big idea that wild ones really do pay a high price to love. We looked at Jesus' words about putting Him first in all things. And so for us now, we're going to take a look at another question. And we've looked at how to love Jesus, but now how is Jesus calling us to love other people? And how do we do that, Lisa? How do we love other people?
We look at the Bible. So the Apostle Paul in the Bible is a great example of what it meant to sacrificially love people. Let's read a little about him in Acts 14. We'll start in verse 8. In Lystra there sat a man who was lame. He had been that way from birth and had never walked. He listened to Paul as he was speaking. Paul looked directly at him, saw that he had faith to be healed, and called out, "Stand up on your feet." At that, the man jumped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. So we have here Paul and Barnabas. They're traveling through what is modern-day Turkey now, and they're just preaching about Jesus. They're sharing the gospel, and they see a man who was lame from birth, and because he had faith, he was healed. Paul healed him. But immediately, all of the people began worshiping Paul and Barnabas as gods. They even called them Zeus and Hermes, the Greek gods. But they began to worship them. The story goes on to say that Paul rebuked the people. He said, no, like, don't worship us. You have to worship the one true God. Like, we are just human. We're just like you. There's nothing special about us. It's all Jesus. It's all God that did the healing. But
Yeah,
then...
so for Paul, like, he was on this missionary journey
Yeah.
in all of this area. And it does kind of remind me of a story that Tyler and Crystal said, like as they were just going all around this past year, there was a person in a wheelchair, and like God healed that person, and they were able to stand up and walk just like this. So like when we start to do the things that people did in the Bible, we start to see biblical things take place. Pretty incredible.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, we go on to read, let's pick up in verse 19. Then some of the Jews came from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowd over. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, thinking he was dead. But after the disciples had gathered around him, he got up and went back into the city. The next day, he and Barnabas left for Derbe. They preached the gospel in that city and won a large number of disciples. And then they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, strengthening the disciples and encouraging them to remain true to the faith. We must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God, they said.
Wow. So Paul really did pay a high price to put Jesus first in his life. Like he gave up everything. Like he traveled all over sharing the gospel, seeing God do incredible things in people's life. But for Paul, like he paid a high price to love people. And it almost cost him his life. Like what happened in this city of Lystra, the people came, they stirred up the crowds, and they went from wanting to worship them as Greek gods to stoning Paul and him almost dying. Like they thought he was dead. They dragged him out of the city thinking he was dead. But the believers gathered around him. I know they prayed for him, and God raised him up, and he was able to go back into the city. They left the city, and guess what Paul did? He continued to do what God called him to. Now, as a good old Texan, I would have gathered all my buddies and I would have gone back and kicked some Lystra butt, all right? Can you say kick some butt on stage? I don't know.
You just did.
I just did. Happy Mother's Day. All right, so you do that. He did this like out of great love. Like he loves the Lord, he loves the people, but it cost him. He paid a high price. It almost cost him his life. It did cost Jesus his life. Like there's a high price to pay to love. So Jesus lost so we could win. Like this is a principle all throughout the Bible, and I think it's un-American. Like it goes against our way of thinking. Like who wants to lose? Not us. We're Americans. We win at everything. And it goes against our way of thinking, but it's biblical. We lose so that others may win. And when that takes place, we actually win in God's eyes. So Tyler and Crystal, like they lost everything. They gave it all up. They sold it. They went out on the road. They lost so that others would win. And this is a biblical principle that rubs up against us, our culture and our way of thinking. I lose so that you will win. So when I think of you, Lisa, and I think of other moms, like this is what y'all do every day. This is what I get so upset about the kids. I'm like, you can tie your own shoe now. You know, you can clean off the table. Don't make mom do everything. But like you constantly lose all throughout the day so that they can win, so that I can win, so that others can win. So like moms, like you're doing it, you model it before us all the time, every day. You lose so that others can win. It's biblical. It's exactly what God has called us to do. So let's go back to the scripture. After all this, after everything that happened to Paul in Lystra, look what happens. He goes to another city, picks right back up with what happened. In verse 21, it says, there was a large number of disciples that came as he preached in this other city. But then something even crazier happens. It says he goes back. He returns back to Lystra where he almost died. He returns back to there, and in verse 22, strengthening the disciples and encouraging them to remain true to the faith. He goes back to the place that almost killed him. Now, why did he do that? Because there's brand new believers there that need to be strengthened in their faith. And so again, he's like, okay, I may lose my life, but it's worth it. I may lose my life, but I believe it's going to work because I'm going to put Jesus first and me last. And you see, like, this rubs up against how we were taught. So at Stonewater, we're a bunch of losers. Nobody's laughing now. You're like, I didn't sign up for this. That's a t-shirt right there. Stonewater Church, a bunch of losers. And it's like the greatest thing. Like, God calls us to lose so that others might win. So that we might win. Jesus says, deny yourself. Take up your cross. Like, if you're going to be my disciple, you got to give up everything. If you're going to be my disciple, it's going to look like our relationship, comparatively, our relationship is greater than all of the other relationships. Listen to what Paul says next. This is how he strengthened the people. He says this, we must go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. There's a high price to pay to love. And the word there is hardships. So you may be going through some hardships today. You may be going through some tough times right now. Well, recognize you're in really good company with Jesus, with Paul, with many other followers of Jesus who've chosen Jesus first. So if you're going through these hardships, like, make sure you turn it all over to the Lord. Make sure he's first place. And I always tell people, like, when our son went through cancer and we were going through that really difficult hardship, I always said, God didn't get us into this, but God's going to get us out of it. And that was absolutely true. So Paul strengthened the people through this. Now, as I read the Bible, I read it and I come to the conclusion it gets a lot worse before Jesus comes back. Is that how you read it? Like, it gets a lot worse. Like, I went and played golf and went fishing this week. Like, it was a pretty good week, right? Like, it's not that bad. There's not like all these horrible hardships. But what about in Ukraine? There's a lot of hardships. Russia, Indonesia, like, the church is suffering all over the world. Like, it seems like it gets a lot worse before Jesus returns. And so we as a church need to understand that we're going to go through some hardships, but we're not going to go through it alone. Hey, one of the things that we're going to be doing this summer is we're going to take a look at the end times. We're going to take a look and see, hey, what does God require us to do when we go through real hardships near the end when Jesus returns? So if you like end times or you like to look at that, Lisa and I, we're going to have a class on that. And you can go to this website to read a little bit more and also sign up. It's called endtimes.stonewaterchurch.com. Like, read it, but this is going to help us when we go through some real hardships. endtimes.stonewaterchurch.com. So here's how we're going to conclude the message today. We're going to conclude it just like Paul did here, where he says, hey, we must go through some real hardships to enter the kingdom of God. So today, like, we want to strengthen you guys as we're choosing Jesus first, as we're loving other people and paying the high price. And I want to start with the men today. So all the men and all the teenagers and all the young boys, like, guys, I'm telling you, it's worth it. It's worth it to go all in with God, to put Jesus first. Like, it's worth it every time. Like, I didn't always do that. But the times that we've done it together and we put Jesus first, like, it's helped our marriage. Like, there's no chance that we're going to get a divorce if we love Jesus more than each other. Like, with our kids and raising them, like, it's going to be hard and difficult. But with the Lord, like, he's going to instruct you men how to be the spiritual leaders in your home. Like, it's worth it. You can do this. And God's given us the church, that we don't have to do it physically alone. That we can do this together like iron sharpening iron. God's given us a great men's ministry here at Stonewater that you don't have to do it alone. And guys, I would encourage you to go all in with the Lord, go all in with your church family, and really follow him. Be strengthened today with resolve to lead your family and to follow the Lord with everything.
And ladies, it's Mother's Day. For some of us, this is a great day. It's a day where we feel loved and celebrated. But I know for many of us, it's a hard day. It's a day where maybe your hopes and dreams that you had for mothering have not been fulfilled. Or maybe your own mom was gone too soon or was just never really around at all. Or maybe it's a day where your expectations just haven't been met. But I want you all to know that, like, Jesus is worth it. Like, he is there. He is right in the middle of you with your hurt, with your brokenness. He is right there with you when your expectations aren't met and you're not feeling loved and appreciated like you want to. When maybe you're just waiting for a child. He's there with you in that waiting. And if you invest continually in your relationship with the Lord, he's never going to leave you. He's always going to be right there by your side. So I want us to end today just in a time of prayer for all of our moms, but for also all the women. Would you ladies mind standing? Would y'all stand up so I could pray for you today? Jesus, we just thank you that you are a God that sees. Like, you see us in just every place of our life that we're in. Today, Lord, I just lift up all the ladies to you today. In some way, all of us are mothers. Whether we're mothering our own children or we're mothering those around us, I know I've been mothered by so many ladies in my life that are precious to me and that you've given me. Lord, I lift up the new moms to you, the ones that are just exhausted, that have little ones at home. But I lift up to you the ones that are in the middle of the games and the practices and the school projects, Lord. Just strengthen them. Let them know that you see them. You know, the ones that are launching their kids into life, that are helping with the big decisions, the life-changing decisions, the moms of the adult kids. God, just strengthen relationships between moms and kids. Lord, I pray for the adoptive moms. Jesus, you call us to adopt. And this one hits close to home to me. You call us to adopt and to bring children into our home, but Lord, it's hard. So be with those moms this morning and let them know that you see them and that you're right there with them. And gosh, Jesus, the moms that are waiting, the ones that just want their little ones to come so badly, Lord, just be with them in the waiting and let them know that you're their comfort and you're their strength and that you see them and that you love them. So Lord, just bless our ladies today. Let them feel your love. Surround them and comfort them, Lord. Put that niggling in their kids and their husbands and the men in their life to step up and take care of their women today. Lord, thank you for how you love